Good evening, everyone. My name is Joel Whitney from the Brooklyn Public Library's BPL Presents, our arts and culture presenting team, and it pleases me to welcome you to the February International Writers Series, part 2. We started the month with a great event with Olga Tokarczuk and her translator, and we are honored to present two wonderful writers this evening. Ben Okri, author of Every Leaf a Hallelujah and Astonishing the Gods. Okezie Waka, author of God of Mercy, both in conversation with Anderson Tepper. I'll turn it over to Andy in just a moment, and you'll hear more about the series from him. But meanwhile, I wanted to welcome you, and for those of you in Brooklyn, I hope you'll come to our Greenpoint branch for our Lenape-Hoking exhibit in partnership with the Lenape Center. Brooklyn and New York City lie at the heart of Lenape land, and Brooklyn Public Library is pleased to present the first Lenape curated art exhibit in New York City, including work from artists past and present, and a battery of panels on Lenape history. All of that goes through the spring until April 30th. To follow those talks, please go to bklynlib.org/Lenape, Lenape. And for more author talks, exhibits, films, and concerts, please follow our calendar at bklynlibrary.org/bplpresents. But with that, welcome, and let me turn it over to Anderson Tepper, who curates this excellent series. Anderson.
Thank you, Joel, and welcome everyone. I'm going to do a quick introduction of the two writers, and then we'll start our conversation, and we'll have short readings and hopefully time for Q&A, questions in the chat. Ben Okri is a poet, novelist, essayist, short story writer, playwright, and much, much more. He has been called a literary and social visionary and has won numerous international prizes, including the 1991 Booker Prize for his novel, The Famished Road. His most recent books are The Freedom Artist, Prayer for the Living, and just out now, the first US edition of his 1995 novel, Astonishing the Gods, which was named one of BBC's 100 novels that shaped our world, and the beautifully illustrated eco-fable, Every Leaf a Hallelujah, both published by Other Press. Congratulations, Ben, on your new publications, and welcome. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Andy, one of the things I've missed during these last 2-3 years is conversations with you. It's so lovely to see you looking well. And here we are, kind of like bridging the great distances.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a pleasure.
Yes, and thank you.
Looking forward to conversation with Okezie as well. Very much.
And I know it's late in London, so thank you again. And Okezie Waka, who was born and raised in Washington, D.C., is a graduate of Brown University and attended the Iowa Writers Workshop. God of Mercy, set in a magical, uncolonized Igbo land and blending the borders of literary and fantastical fiction, is Waka's debut novel and an extraordinary achievement. The book was published just a few months ago by Astra House. Welcome, Okezie.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Andy, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to welcome you both for a discussion about your books, about your writing, about magic, gods, and much, much more. Ben, first of all, I wanted to ask you about these last several years. You've been incredibly productive during this dark, strange time of pandemic and political upheaval, and across a wide range of genres. I feel like your 2020 novel, The Freedom Artist, was particularly resonant. Have you been especially spurred on by this moment? And what prompted you to revisit Astonishing the Gods and publish it in the US for the first time now?
Well, yeah, we've been living through a very strange time in human history. And to be honest with you, I feel it's getting stranger. The pandemic is just one small part of it, actually. In fact, I think the pandemic actually concealed and conceals the real deep problems overhanging us that we need to face. So I've been aware of this, and I've been writing inside this the consciousness of what we're doing to ourselves, to our freedoms, the shrinking of our spirits and our boundaries, the demeaning of our minds, the dehumanizing of our identities. It's been a very rough and difficult time. And I've been asking these questions about freedom. It becomes extraordinarily pertinent now, more than ever. And I wrote The Freedom Artist out of this deep sense that something is profoundly wrong with the human spirit, with us on this planet. Something is wrong. I couldn't quite put my exact finger on it, and that's why I wrote the novel, as a way of dowsing, as it were, with a pen. And everything else I've written has come out of this sense of disturbance, this sense of unease, a very deep unease. There's hope there, yes, but I think focusing on the hope blinds us to the depth of unease that's working in the underworld, underground of our spirit.
And
It's changed the way I tell stories. Sorry, carry on.
Okezie, I'm just interested in how the path of your first novel to publication. When and where did you write it? What prompted it? And tell us about your experience finding a publisher who really understood what you were doing and encouraged it.
Yeah, those are really great questions. So I started writing God of Mercy, I think, when I finished reading Things Fall Apart. And Chinua Achebe did a great job setting this Igbo landscape about which colonialism is kind of at the periphery, but Igbo culture is at the center. And I realized after reading Things Fall Apart that I, having a twin sister, was saved or spared from Igbo tradition because white missionaries brought in a way of life that allowed for twins to exist. Because according to Igbo tradition, twins had to be cast off in the Igbo forest. So I left reading Things Fall Apart being grateful for the white missionaries for coming in and saving twins like me. But I knew that that wasn't the point of Things Fall Apart as I got older. And I needed to write a novel that talked about how Black communities, African communities, Igbo communities could evolve in positive ways that didn't involve or that didn't center whiteness or white hegemony. And so that was the beginning. That was the seed of God of Mercy. And I think I was very fortunate to have found a literary agent who believed in the work from the beginning. I actually worked with two agents before him, and they kind of had different ideas about where the book should go, but my agent, Ross Harris, really believed in it as it was and found a home with Danny Vasquez at Astra House. And he also believed in the story as it was written, and very little change was done to it at Astra House. And so a lot of what readers are receiving is what I put on the page originally. So I'm very fortunate in that way.
And Ben, I'm reminded of talking to you about your first books and your experience as a young writer. And in your introduction, you say that Astonishing the Gods had been with you for a long time, but practically poured out of you in the summer of 1993. Tell us more about the germ of the idea and what got you to finally write it.
Well, I realize now that I didn't answer a question that you asked earlier about why Astonishing the Gods is coming out now in America. Yes, I focus too much on the unease. So I'll try and answer both questions. Way back in 1995, I'd done a lot of writing. I'd written the Famished Road trilogy practically. I'd written poems and short stories, and I was a little bit tired. I needed a bit of a rest. And the only way I could think of doing it back then was just to fast. And I just occasionally I do this. I just went through a little fast. And one evening, I was going down the street and something strange happened. And that ignited an old idea I had as a kid of someone who arrived on an island, a mysterious island. I'd carried this idea since I was a child, didn't know what to do with it. But this incident on the street triggered it because I suddenly understood why the island was mysterious and who the invisible people were and so on and so forth. So I came back home and just began writing the story, and it practically wrote itself. Years later, I realized now that the theme of invisibility was actually more anguished than I realized at the time. Invisibility fascinates us human beings, for all sorts of reasons. In some cases, it's a symbol of power. It's not for nothing that, Hermes, you wear the sandal of Hermes and you become invisible, or you wear the hat of Hermes and you become invisible. It's not for nothing that Ralph Ellison is fascinated by invisibility, that H.G. Wells. All cultures have this dialogue with invisibility. In Nigeria, we have this thing where a person disappears and then comes back, and they're not quite the same person they were before. They've undergone a kind of a transformation. So invisibility as a prelude to transformation. All of these ideas came together in this story, and that's more or less how it happened. And as to why now in America, well, you have to answer. You have to tell me why it takes 27 years for a novel about transformation and invisibility to appear in America.
Okay, Okezie, I wanted to ask you about your characters. There's a key in the beginning of the book to keep them separate and clear. And particularly, I want to know about Ijoma, if I'm pronouncing her right, who's a mute young girl with special magical powers. Why is she considered a threat to her own villagers as well as other rival villages?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Ijoma is a young Igbo girl who lives in a closed off village that has evaded colonialism and technology and other Western kind of imports. And she's gifted with the ability to fly or to levitate. And she's a threat to her community because what her flights signal is a change to the status quo. It's a change, it's what the Dibia Ibokwe says, that the goddess, Ani, the goddess of the earth, is dying, and Chukwu, the supreme god, is reclaiming power. And so this kind of metaphysical arrangement troubles the village because they don't know what it is to have the goddess of the earth not be deified any longer. And so Ijoma, and then it also signals trouble to the neighboring village, Amalike, because there's a flying girl, and how do we make sense of that? And the church in that community tries to say that she's a witch, and they try to explain it off as some demonic kind of thing, as we do in the West when we don't understand things. But in reality, what's happening is that she's fallen in love with the god of her community. And this has its precedence at least in my life, in stories about Igbo slaves when they were brought to the Americas, how they flew back to Africa after overturning the slave ships. Or even in Catholicism, there's a saint, Saint Joseph of Cupertino, who is known to have flown, or who's known to have levitated when being in the presence of God at church or at mass. And so these stories kind of set the precedent for a story like Ijoma's, where falling in love with the mystical and the divine can lead to supernatural phenomena occurring.
Yeah, I want to talk about the gods in both your books, and Ben, please jump in if you want to, add something. But speaking of Ijoma, I just she reminded me in some ways of the spirit child Azaro in The Famished Road. Was that book on your mind also? Because I've heard you talk about the influence of Chinua Achebe, you've just mentioned, but also Toni Morrison. But it occurred to me, yeah. Absolutely.
So The Famished Road is an amazing novel. It was one of the books that I researched when preparing for writing God of Mercy, because of the two-spirit that the protagonist lives in and engages with. Ijoma sort of has that a little bit, where she's like engrossed in the world of spirits when she's in her diary entries to Chukwu, as well as living in the real world of being in her village and being an attendant at the new church that she finds herself in. And so, yes, like things fell apart. Toni Morrison, Ben Okri, Gabriel Marquez, like all these writers who play with ontology, who play with reality. We're all kind of writers that I gleaned a lot of I guess acquired a lot of inspiration from when trying to find the confidence to write a novel like this.
Yeah, I love the image of the flying. Ben, that also reminded me of something you once said to me. You said, literature helps put wings on our backs. Astonishing the Gods is a story of a quest, of an adventure in a land of invisibility. What were some of the themes you wanted to explore on the different levels of this book? And as you've said before, how was this book misread by some critics who didn't go deep enough in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think it's, well, first of all, Okezie, it's really, really wonderful to hear you pay tribute in this way to your cultural literary sources. It's actually a wonderful quality in a writer to do this. Most writers take the trouble to conceal and to hide, and I think they don't develop nearly so well as those who acknowledge. So bless you. The thing about invisibility is that people perceive it from a materialist point of view, and when you do that, invisibility becomes weakness. Invisibility becomes a cause for fear. Invisibility becomes the abdication of personal, social, and cultural power. I think this has been a mistake. I think this has been a misreading of what invisibility is. And I think also because in our culture right now, we're obsessed with visibility. We think visibility equates to fame, equates to presence in a culture, presence in a land. All of that is absolutely true, yes. But there is a level at which invisibility is actually more powerful than visibility. That's what interested me. And it interests me because visibility has its limits. Visibility has the limitations of what it can do, what it can achieve, what it can, whereas invisibility already has gone beyond the limitations of visibility. For me, these two things are kind of like swapped around. These two things actually exchange places. When you explore their meaning in culture, especially the centrality of the origins of culture. Almost all cultures, I've said this before, almost all cultures take their roots from the invisible presences, spirits, gods, ancestors. All of our great origin stories find their roots, find their mysterious roots in the invisibility of things. That's what interested me. I wanted to put invisibility side by side with powerlessness and to see what happens, to put it next to power, to put it next to all of these dialogue we have about presences and absences in society and in history. I also think that visibility was in many ways one of the earliest problems attending our cultural presence in a way. And I was fascinated by the idea of invisibility as being the place where regeneration begins. It's not surprising that in many of the kind of like Afrofuturist films, novels, plays, and so on and so forth, there is this increasing interest in the unseen. I think we've exhausted the seen. I think it's time we started to explore the unseen. The unseen for me leaks. The unseen for me transcends. It goes below, it goes above, it goes round the side of. It blurs boundaries. I think it's the beginning of a whole new dialogue about a new kind of presence in our cultural sphere.
I want to ask both of you to tell me more about the fictional landscapes you've created in your books. So Okezie, I've heard you say that you specifically didn't want to mention the country Nigeria. Why? And where are we, and what is the time period in both, or are we outside time in some sense?
Yeah, that's if it's okay, I can start.
Yeah.
So I know Ben Okri is also, I don't know if you identify as Nigerian, so I hope this doesn't offend. But a couple of things. So a part of why I didn't want to mention Nigeria at all in the novel was because I was angry at colonial presences. And Nigeria to me felt like this neo-colonial construct that I didn't want to deal with in the space. I wanted the novel to be a safe space for the Igbo reader, the Black reader, the conscious reader. And so Nigeria didn't fit well in that imagining. The other reason, and I don't think I told my editor this, was because there is right now this contemporary movement for Igbo people to be self-actualized in Nigerian space, or in Igbo lands, I should say. And so there was the 1966 Biafra Nigerian Civil War, where Biafra wanted to be independent or wanted to secede from the Nigerian states. And that movement has continued today with characters like Nnamdi Kanu and other folks who are seeking Igbo liberation for a number of reasons. And so I wanted this novel to be a space where people could imagine these Igbo spaces like Nnewi, or Nnewi City as I call it, outside of the construct of Nigeria, outside of the parameters of colonization. So that was my reason for that. And I think, part of what people have said about, this is kind of a tangential point, but part of what people have said about God of Mercy has been that it reads like a fable. That's been a critique that I've heard in a number of places. And I think that was very intentional. I wanted there to be this dreamlike consciousness that kind of carried the novel through. And I promise you, if I had read Astonishing the Gods before writing God of Mercy, I think God of Mercy would be even more fable-like, because even more dreamlike, because of the way that Astonishing the Gods carries itself. Another thing that I wanted to achieve, and I don't know if I did it, like time will be the teller of that. And it's something that I have in common, I think, with Astonishing the Gods, is that in that island, in Astonishing the Gods, the currency is suffering. They talk often about how suffering is the reason why the island attains its beauty. And in God of Mercy, Ijoma suffers terribly. She suffers at the hands of her father. She suffers at the hands of the Christian church. And as a consequence of that suffering, she literally recovers her voice. She finds a new version of who she is. And so I think I say that to say that in our quest of achieving visibility, or in our quest of even understanding invisibility, or in our quest of understanding the larger parameters that exist in society, I think we have to reckon with the fact that human life is suffering and includes incredible amounts of suffering, and that kind of evading that reality doesn't serve us when achieving these higher or more noble pursuits.
Well, in the Astonishing the Gods, I alluded to this suffering, but didn't specify it, because everything that they built came out of the depth of this suffering. It was so great that that even to, I think there's a character in the book who says to the young man who comes on the island, when he asks a question about happiness, he says, "Look, please don't mention the word happiness on this island again." And I kept wanting this brush, these two big ideas of a world that comes out of suffering but shows absolutely no sign of it. And this idea of happiness, which seems to go against this suffering that is not visible. So I'm fascinated by invisible themes that pressure a narrative, and I think it's because many of our stories, we come from a tradition where our stories kind of like are vigorous, aren't they? Kind of like really vigorous and powerful, and stressed. And I don't mean stress in terms of being stressed. I mean stressed in terms of poetry. And I was fascinated by what happens when there is too much of that, to a point where it resolves into something else. So, and to tell a story about something so painful as the hard stone of suffering, and to have the penumbra of invisibility around it, is a very, very, very strange operation, and it gives me great sympathy with what you're doing in your novel, Okize. The two novels seem like mirror images of one another, coming from some common source. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the gods and the deities in both your books. Who are they, and what powers do they have over the human world? Okize, in your book, they're at war with each other, right?
Yeah, and this precisely, and this gets at, I think, what Ben is speaking about when we talk about invisibility. We never meet the gods. We have no idea what they're doing, what they're saying, if they even exist, but we know that they're characters because of the workings of the Dibia, Ibokwe. And so the gods exist as part of the Igbo pantheon. So all of the gods that are listed in the novel are gods that exist or existed when Ordinani or Igbo religious thought was popular. And so that's where they come from. And they serve the purpose of guiding belief, because belief is invisible. Belief is not something that we can see or sense or feel in the physical sense or in the material sense, but it is something that shapes how we perceive reality. And so these gods are literal guides to help us understand the phenomenon of flight in this young girl. They serve as ways to understand things that we don't typically see in the world. Kind of like Jesus turning water into wine. That makes sense because we understand him as the Son of God. While Ijama's flight makes sense because we understand her as the daughter of the Supreme God. It makes sense to them in that way. It doesn't make sense to people who don't share that same epistemological underpinning, right? So the Christian church says, we see the same phenomenon, but we call her a witch, and we'll imprison her, and we'll abuse her, and we'll do terrible things to her, and not celebrate this wonderful thing that is happening in our world. And so that's kind of the measure with which the gods kind of span the novel. They're there to help us guide the beliefs of the people in which this phenomenon is housed.
Mm.
Well, the gods in Astonishing the Gods are just simply numinous. They just hover around the island. They radiate through the invisibility of the people because the people now approximate their condition. I see the gods in Astonishing the Gods, not in a Homeric sense of characters or presences, but as beings that have radiated their consciousness and their spirit through these people who have become transformed by suffering. The point I'm trying to make here is that the more the people refine themselves, the more they attain to the godlike condition that illuminates their world. That's why when the visitor comes to the island for the first time, he feels that this place has been made by gods, and this is in many ways a refinement on my part of the idea of gods that we have in Nigeria. I've abstracted them in order to give more space to what the people have done out of their great suffering. The thing is, none of the critics of the Astonishing the Gods, when it first came out, actually asked the central question: what is this suffering that is not referred to? What is this suffering that there's a great silence about? And why is there this big silence about it? I'm not going to answer that question. Okize, you're going to say something.
Well, no, I think it's so interesting because when you were talking about time and history, and when we look at the West, like America or London in circa 2021, versus a place like Nigeria. The contrast is stark, right? London, America has these tall skyscrapers and these very fancy roads and these very fancy infrastructure. Nigeria kind of, in some parts, lacks those things. But then when you consider the history of suffering in the United States and how the United States is built on the back of slavery and this transatlantic slave trade, all of a sudden, we wonder about why those two spaces look so different and what would have happened if Nigeria had involved itself in the slave trade as the West had done. I think that's the thing with suffering, is that it's terrible while it's happening, right? But then the results of it make one seem interminable, make one seem sometimes even very supreme. And without the context of history, the meaning of suffering can get lost, I think. And I think that's what happens with Ijoma in my novel as well.
I would say something different about Nigeria and United States and England. You visit Nigeria blindfold. You land there, apart from the heat, forget the heat. What you feel is an incredible vibrancy of the land, if you like, a kind of excess of narrative presence that you don't feel when you come to London, blindfold. Mm. The air, and by air, I don't mean just air that you breathe. I mean the air of narratives, of the presence and the strength of narratives, of the way in which they seem to. I think was it Jung? Was it Jung or was it one of his disciples who said when he went to Africa for the first time, when he put foot on the soil of Africa for the first time, he felt like he was engulfed in a continent of stories. This is just one place, and I think that's also what we're talking about. That these two different kinds of lands have refined human presence in completely different ways, and that's actually worth asking questions about. Why is one land bristling? I mean, people tell me that there are parts of America that have this bristling narrative presence, and the other parts that don't. Why is that? And I'm talking about presence. I'm talking about narratives here as invisible presences that are unavoidable. You can't escape them. They swarm your aura. They enter your consciousness. They wait to take form. And I think it's one of the things that we're very fortunate to have, Okezie. And I think it's one of the reasons why there's this tremendous explosion of Nigerian and African literature at this particular moment. Mm-hmm. We have found a way to let those continents of stories be given form. We found a way to tell those stories. That's been one of the big problems. We had all these stories, but we were constrained by the way in which we felt we had to tell them. The minute we cracked that, the minute we broke that apart and said, no, we're not telling the stories in that way anymore, because that way is already implicated with colonialism, with so many assumptions that have become quite dangerous and actually kind of like affected our spirit in negative ways. The minute we broke that, everything became possible. Mm. And I think we're at the beginning of a really golden age of our literature.
Mm. Okay, Okezie, is that something you felt when you were writing?
Somebody should say amen.
Amen. I believe. No, I agree. I think that this is a golden era. I think that I feel very blessed and very just privileged to be able to write at this time, because there are so many stories coming from the continents, from African communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities across the diaspora. I think one thing that I felt when I wrote God of Mercy was, am I even the person to write this story? I was born in DC. I was raised in DC. I spent 3 years in Nigeria for middle school in Abuja, but that's even an urban center. And I wasn't sure if I was the right person to talk about.
You should never ask those. You should never ask those questions. Okay.
I know.
The moment the story has chosen you to punish you with the telling of and reward you with the redeeming of, the minute that happens, all the strange conjunctions have taken place. All that remains is for you to just surrender.
No,
Surrender and suffer a little bit, and then celebrate.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And great. Thankfully I had mentors like Oke Ndibe and people in my corner who really guided me through that process. But yes, you're right. I wish I never doubted that this story was mine to tell. But I do feel very privileged to have been able to tell this story and share it with the global community, because I think it's an important story to tell about my people.
Well, I mean, this is lovely conversation. I'll just have two more questions, two or three. And if people want to ask a question, just put it in the chat, and then we'll do a short readings. But Ben, I wanted to ask you, Astonishing the Gods is a much different book from The Famished Road. It's more pared down, fable-like, as we've been saying, but all your books have signaled new directions. Where did you go in your writing after this book, after Astonishing the Gods, and what sort of writing are you concentrating on now? What are you working on now?
Yeah, I've always been suspicious of the idea that one novel leads to another. I think one novel exhausts a particular song. I think a novel takes hold of you because of the ideas, the pain, the love, something needs to be told, and it takes hold of you. And it is not part of a series. Very rarely is it. Although the Famished Road series exists, and we'll talk about that in a different space. But a novel demands to a kind of auto universe, kind of self-sustaining universe. I don't think it leads to, but I think there's a kind of a cyclicity in the way the mind works when it creates. You do one kind of work, you've finished it, you've exhausted that. And then something else in you, something to do with something that you lack. I'm fascinated by the relationship between lack and creativity, the things that you lack, things that you don't have, the things that are missing. They're powerfully, they draw you powerfully. And so after Astonishing the Gods, I went back to Dangerous Love, to Landscapes Within. I revisited. Then I went forward onto the second book in the Famished Road cycle, which was a completely different realization of that idea. Then I went on to the third book, and then later on I went to a book called Star Book, and I wrote short stories and poems. And I have so many sides of my interests, because I began as a poet, graduated to narrative. At the same time, I was fascinated by theater, and that's what I've been doing more recently. I've been writing plays. I'm writing a lot of plays, short stories, and plays, and they have something in common. Short stories and plays. They have a tremendous rigor of form. They're the curative quality that you need after the novel. The novel spoils you. The novel makes you kind of a sprawling thinker and a sprawling human being. The novel makes you tend to go on and on and on and on, and it leads to indiscipline. And the short story quickly binds you again. It toughens you. It strengthens your gaze. It refocuses you. It introduces a strong quality of humility into your prose. And theater is impossible. I mean, theater is terrifying. Anyone who's a novelist and tries to write plays, something happens to them. They have a nervous breakdown or something like that, because suddenly you can't describe. You all the tools that you have in the novel to work with. All of them are taken away from you. It's like all your wings and all your superpowers, and they're all taken away from you. And you just have to work with action and words, the things that people do and what they say, and even with what they say. You can't say everything in a play. Even within the play, there's a tremendous narrowness and tightness of the play form is probably the most resonant. You take a thin thread, and that thin thread has to speak for everything. You know, you take a play like The Seagull, and all of Russia has to be in there somehow, including the possibility of war and peace. It's in there in its tremendous capacity for resonance. So all of these are very different occupations of the spirit. And as for poetry, we're not even going to go there tonight.
And Okezie, I'm interested in what new directions you're going in. I've heard you speak about a work that you're working on next that's very different from the first novel.
It's so funny that you even know about it's called The Empty Vessel. I don't know, I'm not even sure if I should even be sharing the title because it's still very fresh and very new on my computer's hard drive. But it takes place in the Americas, and it is a novel about racism, and it's a novel about hope. What are we hoping for, and what does it mean when we tell? I work as an educator, as an elementary school teacher, and what does it mean when we tell our students that go to college and everything else will work out, right? When the reality is that college and the university is an institution of learning, not an institution of safeguarding promises about life, and not institutions that protect us from the realities of police brutality, racism, sexism, etc. And so I'm working to explore how we hope and how we place our hope in.
Okezie, I don't want to interrupt you, but
yeah.
Don't talk anymore about this novel.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't want you to spill anything.
Yeah, don't give us this novel before you've written it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
yeah, sounds good.
Talk around it. Do a Muhammad Ali around it.
Okezie, what I was interested in what you were saying before was that you were doing it in a much different style. That you were much more minimalist. So it was a new direction in writing for you.
Absolutely. So more minimalist. I don't know what to say at this point. But it is more minimalist. And it's different because it doesn't take place in Africa. It takes place in the United States. And I'm excited to see what comes of it. Yeah.
And my last question, I just want to, Ben, this is the beautiful book that you've done with an artist, an illustrator named Diana Ejaita.
She's wonderful.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you quickly about this collaboration. I'm interested in how you've created such a vibrant fairy tale about our natural world, and how you engage in what you've spoken about this existential creativity in the face of a climate crisis. Tell us more about that existential creativity.
Well, existential creativity is just basically a kind of honesty about where we are right now, which we don't really want to face, but at some point we're going to have to face it. We are in a situation of a climate catastrophe hanging over us. We are, some will say, not quite in the end game, but somewhere close. It is that serious. The oceans, 90% of fishes and ocean and marine life, and the vitality of the oceans itself gone, 90% of it. The forests, they're disappearing. Topsoil that we rely on to plant, to grow our food, lost half of it in the last 100 years. The ozone layer, all of these things are things that are known, but when you add all of it together, along with the fact that we are carrying on as if nothing is happening, then you have a recipe for a disaster that we're sleepwalking into. And when you face that fact, honestly, as a writer, we're in a kind of existential situation we have never been in before, as a human species. Never been in it before. Peoples have been in it, tribes that have disappeared, Atlantis that sank, and so on. Peoples have been in it, but the whole globe has never been in this situation before that we're in right now. We even need a new term, a new existentialism, a new term that is more existential than existentialism. And how does a writer function in this time? Being honest about it, and yet not wanting to be doom-laden, not wanting to give up, not wanting to give up humor and playfulness and love and dreams and all the things that one loves. How do you bring these two truths together? That's what existential creativity is for me. Everything one does has to in some way draw attention to where we are, and at the same time bear witness to the richness of our consciousness and of our possibility. And out of this story came. And it's a story, a fable about trees and forests. Because where I grew up in Nigeria and in Lagos and in Ughelli, all the forests that I grew up knowing that were there, rich, abundant, and places of narrative and story and gods and ancestors, they've all gone, they've disappeared, they've cut them down. There's nothing there anymore. In some places, there's just ghetto. In other places, there's just dryness. The rivers that I grew up bathing in and dancing in and swimming in, gone. They're not even thin threads anymore. They've just gone, they've disappeared. Rivers that are gods, that are goddesses, they have gone, you know? And I wanted to write a simple tale about this from a point of view of a child who woke up to consciousness about this. I wanted to write a story that was addressed to the children in us, because there's no point writing stories to the adult in us, because we're the ones who've got us to this place, and we're the ones who are still closing our eyes to, you know, the existential nature of our contemporary world. And one more thing, she flies. She flies. She flies with the dreams of trees.
Thank you, Ben. Why don't we do a reading? Okizi, do you want to do a short reading, and we can wrap up with that? If there are any questions, we'll try to get to that too.
Yes, I can do something very, very short. This is chapter 1 of God of Mercy. There is the final truth, and Ijoma knew it resided within her, tinier than a speck, when the blowing wind became like wings, and her feet shook the branches of the leaning orange tree, knocking Ichulu's dust to the ground. It drew her upward, raising her like smoke from a burning fire, raising her to the nest of Inza birds and the first scatterings of light from Anyangwu, the divine sun. She rested there, suspended like fruit too precious to pluck, or a thought too erratic to name. She rose to the sky, and nobody was there to see it. The reasoning lay in her wind-blown wings. The pleasure lay there too, and they joined with her spirit to beat steadily, steadily, deep like the Udu, deepening that which was lifted, that which her thoughts and body followed. Her fingers stretched before curling inward towards her palms. Her chest now rose upward, then fell to greet her heart, while the prickly dots like a million rose thorns flashed across her left cheek, then her lips, then her right earlobe, before passing into the air, returning to its abode as she let out a sigh and magnified the wonder. Tears were trembling in her eyes, and through them Ijoma saw a single vision printed past Igwe, the divine sky, with her lips moving, counting then recounting the faces of ancestors and the faces of those unknown, celebrating their names with promises guided by much hope, a promise of many prayers to those little ones, those whom she had not yet seen, those looking through her with truth and kindness, as she prayed and promised and felt more still than death itself, and in that stillness found the greatest of life, and in that life praised the most supreme for making anything or one possible. She closed her eyes, the sky closed too, full clouds colliding within a moment, and Ijoma found her feet touching the earth and clutched her hands, now warm from the evening light. And she did not understand it all, not the faint vibrations in her bones, or the smell of sky-bound dust, or the rupture of what was thought to be known and understood, as she heard Afodele's footsteps and ran through the compound to hide and find understanding in Nena's red clay home.
Thank you, Okizi. Thank you. Thank you. Ben, do you
Should I
have a-
read something? Should I
Yeah.
read something short?
Sure.
I'll read the beginning of Astonishing the Gods.
Okay.
It is better to be invisible. His life was better when he was invisible, but he didn't know it at the time. He was born invisible. His mother was invisible too, and that was why she could see him. His people lived contented lives, working on the farms under the familiar sunlight. Their lives stretched back into the invisible centuries, and all that had come down from those differently colored ages were legends and rich traditions, unwritten and therefore remembered. They were remembered because they were lived. He grew up without contradiction in the sunlight of the unwritten ages, and as a boy, he dreamt of becoming a shepherd. He was sent to school, where he learned strange notions, odd alphabets, and where he discovered that time can be written down in words. It was in books that he first learned of his invisibility. He searched for himself and his people in all the history books he read and discovered to his youthful astonishment that he didn't exist. This troubled him so much that he resolved, as soon as he was old enough, to leave his land and find the people who did exist to see what they looked like. He kept this discovery of his recent invisibility to himself and soon forgot his dream of becoming a shepherd. But in the end, he didn't have to wait till he was old enough. One night, when the darkness was such that it confirmed his invisibility in the universe, he fled from home, ran to the nearest port, and stole off across the Emerald Sea. He traveled for 7 years. He did all the jobs that came his way. He learned many languages. He learned many kinds of silences. He kept his mouth shut as much as possible and listened to all the things that men and nature had to say. He traveled many seas and saw many cities and witnessed many kinds of evil that can sprout from the hearts of men. He traveled the seas, saying little, and when anyone asked him why he journeyed and what his destination was, he always gave 2 answers. One answer was for the ear of his listener, of his questioner. The second answer was for his own heart. The first answer went like this: I don't know why I'm traveling. I don't know where I am going. And the second answer went like this: I am traveling to know why I am invisible. My quest is for the secret of visibility. Those who worked with him in those years saw him as a simple man. Actually, they didn't see him at all.
Thank you, Ben. You know, Ben, when you mentioned that these 2 books, yours and Okizi, are kind of mirror images of each other, it reminded me of the cover, your cover of Astonishing the Gods. Tell us about the reverse image on the cover of the title.
That's the artist Andreas Goerich, who came up with. We discussed many kinds of ways of illustrating of illustrating a novel, and an essay that I wrote about Astonishing the Gods began with the line, "This novel was written in a Leonardo way." Mm-hmm. Upside down, in a mirror, mm-hmm. Backwards in a mirror, and that's how it was written. When I began to write it, I didn't write it in a normal linear way that I normally wrote before. I wrote it in an inverse way, and I think because of that, he decided to have the title the other way around, because it's a very Leonardo thing, mm-hmm. But also because it's a universe of mirrors, and it's a universe of invisibility, and also the universe is in many ways the reverse of how we perceive our world, its power structures, its realities, its possibilities. And so I think it was a genius idea. Yeah, that's Andreas. And now that we're talking about covers, Okizi, tell us about the visual image on your cover.
I don't know much about it. I know that I think it was I think the illustrator was Sarah Woods. I hope I'm remembering her name correctly. But she said that she got it from just the text and being inspired by the words in it. I think the eye is supposed to represent, be symbolic of the vision that Ijoma would have when she'd be in the sky. But I don't know too much about the inspiration of the novel, of the illustration.
Well, we have time for one or two questions. We have one, and let's see this. As West African writers, how do you navigate your English narrative that presents so many identities for the African character, African, Igbo, Black African, Nigerian, to describe one African? And have either of you ever been inspired to write an Igbo narrative in the Igbo language, or would it be a challenge?
That's a big question.
Big question. Big question.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to go first, or shall I take
I'll go.
this?
I feel like I feel like you have more to this. So I'm gonna go first and just briefly say that I'm not fluent in either written or spoken Igbo, so I couldn't write a novel in Igbo. I can write some things in Igbo, but not a lot. As far as language, I think I'm always writing as a human being. And so by virtue of writing as a human being, and Black people are human beings, I'm always writing to and for a Black audience in whatever form I choose. And so with God of Mercy, a lot of the English is Igbo-fied. In the writing that I do now, a lot of the English is just very open and minimalist. But I think as long as it's written in the spirit of liberation and love, it will resonate with Black readers and all readers.
I think you find a new kind of language, Andy Anderson. I think you find a new kind of language. I think that is one of the blessings, one of the challenges, one of the difficulties that we Black African writers writing today. It's one of the beauties of our situation, that we have these rich languages, these rich narratives, these rich universes, and we have to find a new kind of narrative. We have to find a new kind of language. It's why the famished. People keep asking me, why did you write the famished road like that? And I said, it's because I'm trying to navigate within a tradition that narrows narrative, a vast and boundless universe. I'm trying to navigate the Igbo, the Urobo way of telling stories. If I wrote in Urobo, I will be missing out on my mother's side. So if I chose one language, I'll be missing out on the nuances of another language as part of my heritage. So the Chinua Achebe had this problem as well. How do you tell an Igbo story in the English language? You alchemize the language. That's what you do. You alchemize it. You make it. You bend this language. You bend this language. You make it pliable and open, receptive to all of these possibilities. But it's not just the language you bend. The form has to be bent. The form has to be redreamt, has to change, has to be transformed. And it's not just finding a new form, but the new form that you find has to itself feel like it's always been like that. So you also have to classicize your newness. It's an extraordinary place to be. The final thing is, if I were to attempt to write any of the stories or novels that I've written in Urobo, in my father's language or my mother's language, which is Igbo, Agbo, they will be pretty terrible. I won't lie to you. It'll be a great disservice to the richness of the idea I'm trying to express. So it's a trade-off. And at the end of the day, I think we make something new because of these losses and because of these impossibilities.
And I've said to you before, it was a thrill to see you at the Booker Prize ceremony this year. We've talked about a new generation of African writers, but it was 30 years after The Famished Road. And it was wonderful to hear Okezie say the influence it had on him, in fact. Are you surprised about this long life of this book? You've told me that books have surprising lives. You know, you never know.
Books are strange. Books are the weirdest things. A book comes out and everyone hails it and everyone buys it. It's you know, people assume it's going to be a classic. It's going to last forever. 10, 15 years after the author dies, people forget it and they don't care anymore and it disappears. So many great writers that one has read about in the past who were gods in their times and who now they're dust. You start to read the books and they melt in your hands. They just turn to smoke as you're reading them. They're so gone. It's the strangest thing. You can never say with a book. It's in contemporary success says nothing about its endurance. It's just a strange thing. So for The Famished Road to still be around and still being read and still being discovered 30 years later is really, really humbling. Because at the time, many people just assumed, oh, he won the Booker Prize because he's Black. You know, it's not going to last. Many people wrote the book off. It says, it's not going to last. You're not going to hear about this guy or this book in 5 years' time. 5 years went past, 10 years went past, and people just kept growing. And, you know, I have before me the great example of Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart is what, 50, 60 years now? They said the same thing when it came out. You know, they were fairly dismissive of it. Some people were. And it quietly grows, it quietly spreads. A new generation reads it, and it gives birth to new possibilities. And that's what we should be doing. We should be aiming for books that truly endure, not books that are necessarily just successful on the day that they're born.
And you said it's becoming every man's classic, I believe.
It's just. I wish I could show it to you. I should. Yeah, it's there somewhere. It's the second African novel to become an everyman classic.
Oh.
After Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, which is, you know, in the old days to enter the everyman classic, it tends to happen when you're dead, and it happens now to some people. You know, Salman Rushdie is there. A couple of living writers are there, and it's. I mean, it itself is not an absolute sign of endurance, but it's a sign of something, and yeah, very moved by it.
I think we'll leave it there, and I thank you both. This has been a wonderful conversation and a real thrill to have you two together, speaking together.
Andy, it's been so lovely talking to you. We always have the greatest conversation. And Okezie, well, good luck with your novel. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Ordered a copy already.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure talking with you, Andy. Ben Okri, you are an inspiration. Thank you so much for doing this event with me. It was a pleasure.
Bless.
Real treat. Be well.
Yeah,
Take care.
Joel.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bless. Take care, Andy.
Okay, see you, Ben.
Bye-bye.